Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is August 1st, finally a football month around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about walk-ons. Obviously, we will not have walk-ons in college football anymore, and that definitely does take some flavor out of the sport, but we still have plenty of great stories to break down, and I'll obviously get to that in the first segment. Then we'll get into my Big 12 breakdown. We'll get into quick thoughts on every team. Then we'll get into my predictions for the season. A very weird conference. I'll just leave it at that. Definitely a lot of teams up at the top that have plenty to say about this conference this upcoming year. Then we'll get into a little talk around some of the different teams and programs that are kind of sitting under the surface, that are starting to emerge and starting to click on the recruiting trail, in the behind the scenes NIL. All of the different things are starting to move in the right direction, and I think they might just be on the verge of something really special at these 5 programs. Then we'll get into my Thursday hot take, and I will break down how I think rotations and depth are by far the most important thing in this college football season, and I'll break down a couple of different examples throughout the college football world that you need to watch throughout this year. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun interactive experience here, and I think that's always good for the both of us. So if you want to use that, again, that is gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in and let's talk about walk-ons. Obviously, we are looking at a new future without walk-ons in it. We went from 120 players on a college football roster down to 105, and there are no more scholarship restrictions. And it seems like the colleges are going to take advantage of that, likely push more money into football in terms of scholarships, and definitely be able to allocate a little bit more resources to some other sports as well. I think baseball is getting a boost, softball as well, which we'll break down throughout this, but it's definitely one of those contentious topics. It's something that a lot of people have a lot of opinions on. Some coaches are not big fans of it because obviously it makes their job a little bit harder. Losing 15 players are very valuable players to that program, so it definitely makes that job a little bit harder, definitely makes it a little bit more difficult to go into, and Dabo Swinney kind of put it as no coach really wants this, and I understand that. That's definitely something that I think is held by a lot of coaches. They don't necessarily love the new future that they're getting into, especially with the roster size, but there are a number of different reasons why this is likely something that probably had to happen. And obviously, there's a number of different things that go into this, and there are so many different things to kind of break down with this. But overall, I mean, you look at kind of the world of college sports and college football in particular, and you see all of the energy, all of the money, all of the resources that are put towards football and kind of lean in that direction. We're starting to kind of lean a little bit back, right? We're starting to give a little bit more to baseball. I believe they're going from 11.7 scholarships up to 34, and then softball is going from 12 to 25. And while I don't necessarily think all of those scholarships will be used by those two teams, I do think they'll get a little bit of a boost, and that's super important for those smaller sports. So it is kind of that battle between, you want college football to be as great as it possibly can be, but on the other side of things, you don't necessarily want to shortchange the other sports in the college sports landscape. So overall, this is one of those decisions that it doesn't look great, you definitely don't love it. You lose, stories like Baker Mayfield, like Stetson Bennett, that made the most of a situation that was not going to be easy and became college football legends. That's obviously something that we all hold very near and dear, and I'm very much a part of that group that doesn't necessarily love this change. I absolutely love the story of walk-ons and being able to look at, a kid that finds his way from a walk-on role to a starting quarterback to a 2-time champion like Stetson Bennett did is a really magical thing, and it's one of the special things about this sport. There a million different examples. Aiden O'Connell was a finalist for the Burlsworth Trophy in his senior year, which is given out to the most accomplished, the best walk-on, or someone that used to be a walk-on in their school. So Stetson Bennett won it a couple of times, or I believe once at least, his senior season. So there's a number of different things that kind of go into this, and the Burlsworth Trophy is something I want to talk about here for a second because it has a lot of history behind it, and it definitely should. Brandon Burlsworth is a very, very fantastic player that played at Arkansas. He's right there, but this is someone that had a really, really remarkable college football career. He was one of the best walk-ons that has ever really played college football. He went to his dream school of Arkansas, had a couple of different smaller offers, but decided to go to Arkansas. That's where he wanted to be, and ended up being really remarkable. Had a number of All-American offensive guard picks. He was in the All-American team as an offensive guard, was drafted in the third round of the NFL draft. Unfortunately, 11 days later, he died in a car accident, so his family set up this trophy in his honor, and I think it's something that we likely want to keep intact in college sports, and it's kind of an interesting one because I don't really know how they go about it. Obviously, they do have kind of a committee that puts together the winners and the finalists and all of those things for that award. So hypothetically, they could continue doing that, and it could just not have the moniker of walk-on, but it definitely does take a little bit away from that. So that's definitely one of the things that you don't love to see. There's no two ways about that, and definitely want to keep that trophy as important as it is right now, because a lot of kids look at that and they see something that they really, really want to win. Hunter Renfrow was absolutely someone that won this award, made a lot of noise in college while he was at Clemson, and has been really good for the Raiders when he got into the NFL. So overall, when you talk about walk-ons, they are the best stories in college sports. I think everyone kind of agrees with that, whether you're talking about J.J. Watt or you're talking about Aiden O'Connell or Stetson Bennett or Baker Mayfield. There are so many incredible stories of walk-ons making it from a position that none of us would really be able to deal with to being the star of a team, being the one that leads them to national titles, and in the case of Stetson Bennett, become probably definitely the most decorated, probably not the best, but definitely the most decorated Georgia athlete of all time. So I think that's one of those things that you love those stories. There's no two ways about that, and it's one of those things that definitely does hurt a little bit because you want those stories going forward, and you don't necessarily want, anything to be taken away from those kids that have made their way up from the walk-on ranks. The other thing about this is it does help smaller sports, which is something that I got into and I definitely think is the, good part of this, definitely something that helps those smaller sports. But on the other side of this, I do think we still have great stories in this sport. I do think there's still going to be people that have made it from the fourth or third string of their roster who were, 2 stars or 3 stars that just went to a school because they were able to find a way to get a scholarship or they were able to get an offer and they decided to go to Georgia or they decided to go to Texas when they likely weren't going to start their first couple of years, and then they battle through that and they find a way onto a starting roster and make some noise. So I still think there are going to be incredible stories. Now, they won't have the walk-on moniker next to them and they will be getting a scholarship, but it doesn't necessarily change the story, right? It doesn't necessarily change how incredible it is what this kid is doing, and obviously it changes his outside of football life quite a bit because, don't have to worry about paying for school and all of that different type of stuff, but overall, I think it's one of those things that he's still going to show up to practice every day knowing that he has to fight. He's still going to show up to practice every day knowing that he's not as talented as the other kids on the field, and he's got to work a little bit harder to get where he wants to go. So I still think there will be those stories. I still think there will be remarkable tales of, kids finding their way through a crazy world of college football and maybe taking an offer that isn't necessarily the best in terms of playing time, but that's where they want to be, and they battle through and they find their way into a starting role. So I still think there are stories out there. I don't necessarily think you have to have the walk-on moniker to be a remarkable story in this sport. Now, it does kind of take away from it just a little bit. I'm not going to sit here and act like it's the exact same because walk-ons battle through much more than what they battle through on the football field. You have to worry about paying your bills for school, and you have to worry about all this different stuff before you get that scholarship. And then even after you do, you have to worry about a million different other things like keeping your job, which is not as easy for a former walk-on as it is for everyone else. So this is kind of the reality of this sport, and I think when you look down the road 5, 10 years, 15 years even, and you realize, not having walk-ons is definitely going to be something that makes this just a little bit less special. The world of college football just a little bit less special. The world of college sports in a lot of ways a little bit less special because those are the stories you love to hear. Charlie Condon was a baseball player for Georgia this last year. Got drafted 3rd overall. He was a walk-on when he came in. And obviously there's less scholarships to give out over there. But regardless, it's a remarkable story. It's something that everyone kind of gravitates towards. Baker Mayfield the exact same way. He walked on at 2 different universities, Texas Tech and Oklahoma. And it was remarkable to watch him at both. So I do think it's one of those things that we're going to have to find a way to still celebrate those kids, because those kids will still be out there. It won't necessarily be the same type of story. It won't necessarily be the same type of battles that some of the walk-ons in the past have fought, but there's still stories out there that deserve to be highlighted, that deserve to be possibly on the same level as those walk-on awards in the past. So it's one of those things that, yes, it is the end of an era. Yes, it is something that ruins some of the big-time storylines in the sport and some of the greatest things that we've had in the sport's history, like Brandon Burlsworth's history and his legacy that he left behind is one of the most remarkable things we have in the sport. But overall, when you look at the health of college sports and you look at the reality of college football going forward, I don't know if it changes all that much, at least from a fan's perspective. I think it does change, the administrative side, how you go about recruiting, how you go about offers, how coaches go about building their roster, that type of thing. But I think from a fan's perspective, we're still going to be watching a 3 or 2-star kid find his way into a starting roster and make some noise. That's still going to be really cool to watch. There's no two ways about that. So I do think it's one of those things that we are going to have to look a little bit harder to find these remarkable stories. We are going to have to maybe look back at what the kid was recruited as and what offers he had and that type of thing, but the stories will still be there. There will still be remarkable stories that are kind of the walk-on ilk, are kind of that, same build in terms of what they went through, in terms of how they battle, in terms of the legacy they left behind at their university. So this is obviously something that I don't think any of us wanted. I don't think any of us woke up and wanted walk-ons to go away, wanted them to not be a part of college football. But I think when you look at the entire picture and you look at the whole landscape of college sports overall, it's hard for me to sit here and say that it's overall a terrible thing for college sports. I think it's overall a good thing for college sports. It hurts college football a little bit, but we still have those incredible stories that will come out throughout the year, and we will obviously unpack them on here as they do. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to break down the Big 12 teams, a quick thoughts on every team, and then obviously we'll get into our predictions in the third segment. But stick with us, and we'll be we'll be right back with a Big 12 breakdown.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked a little bit about walk-ons and the end of walk-ons and how it's definitely not something that we wanted by any means, but the great stories are still out there. We just might have to look just a little bit harder. But let's jump into the Big 12 breakdown. We'll break down a quick couple of thoughts about every single team, and then we'll get into my predictions in the third segment. We've definitely been getting some very interesting comments around my predictions over the last couple of days, so I'm sure this day will be the exact same. But let's break down all the teams, and let's start with Arizona State. Kenny Dillingham and the Sun Devils are making their debut in the Big 12 this upcoming year, and it's a very interesting team and program overall because there's a lot there. There's a big untapped thing at Arizona State that if they can get to it, if they can find a way to get NIL rolling and get recruiting rolling and get all of these different things pushing in the same direction, this is a dangerous program. And I think Kenny Dillingham is a great guy to have there to do that, and 2024 is going to be a battle. I feel pretty good about that. I think the quarterback play, whether it's Sam Levitt or Jeff Sims, is going to be just a little bit below average. So they're definitely going to be facing a little bit of an uphill battle this year, but I think it's a program that can build into something special. Arizona is a team that absolutely stole the spotlight a year ago in the Pac-12 with Noah Fafita and Tatori McMillan, and frankly, when you have those two guys on your team, you have a shot. So in 2024, they absolutely have a shot in this conference. Obviously, losing Jed Fish is absolutely huge. It'll be interesting to see the effect that has on the offense. Dwayne Aquina is taking over at defensive coordinator for Johnny Nansen, who found his way over to Texas. So I think that's actually a really good fit. I think Dwayne Aquina is going to do a fantastic job over there and kept a lot of people in-house like Decario Davis that they very much needed to keep in-house. So I think Arizona is a very dangerous team in this conference and could be one that we look up in November, and they're very much in the playoff picture. BYU is a funny team because, frankly, I don't necessarily expect a ton from this team this upcoming year, but everyone knows that when you walk into that stadium, you're going to have a problem on your hands. They are going to play you tougher than you expect them to play you, and it's going to be a really, really tough game. So there are a couple of times when this year there will be a better team that walks their way up to Provo, Utah, and gets a loss on the board because BYU is going to find a way. They do have Jake Retzlaff or Jerry Bohannon battling for that quarterback spot. I do think Bohannon is someone that will likely win it because he's played a ton of Big 12 football, has had some success at Baylor, so I'd lean towards Jerry Bohannon, but we'll see what happens there. Baylor is a really, really fun team because when you look at Daquan Finn, he is someone that can totally change a season. He can totally change the complexion of games, of weeks, of entire seasons, and he's someone that is downright special with the football in his hands. So when you look at this team, there's not necessarily anything that jumps off the page. Dave Aranda is very confident in this team and has made a point to call out some of the different media polls and things that have come out, but overall, I think this is a team that is ready to make some noise. I don't necessarily think they're going to make a remarkable run, but at the end of the day, they are on a really good recruiting run, and if you can prove that you're moving in the right direction, that a lot of things are, going the way that you want them to, you're going to be able to keep those guys intact, and that's the name of the game. There's no two ways about that. Cincinnati is a really fun team. Scott Satterfield making his second year in Cincinnati. Definitely a tough break for them. Dante Corleone is out for at least the beginning of the season, likely throughout a lot of the season with some blood clots. Hopefully he gets healthy and can get back on the football field as quickly as possible because that's one of the best defensive tackles in the entire country. They brought in Brendan Sorsby from Indiana to be their starting quarterback. A talented kid, not necessarily going to light the world on fire, but definitely someone that can make some plays. And then Xavier Henderson coming over from Florida is someone that I think could really make some noise in this offense. Very, very fun player. But Colorado is the team that is going to dominate headlines regardless. It does not matter what their record is. It doesn't matter what the result of the last game was. We're going to be talking about Colorado a ton this fall, and frankly, they have the most talented quarterback in the conference right there in Shedeur Sanders. There is no question in my mind that this guy operating at max capacity is beyond what anyone else in this conference can do at the quarterback position. They might have the best player in the conference in Travis Hunter as well, and the big question is that depth and the line of scrimmages. So if you can make those work, if you can block for this guy as well as some of the other teams in this conference, you're going to have a real shot to make some noise. I can promise you that. But Houston is a really, really fun team. Donovan Smith is someone that NFL scouts have just fallen in love with, and now he has Willie Fritz to call plays for him. So this could be a really fun season for Houston. I don't necessarily think they're going to make, crazy amounts of noise, but at the end of the day, you don't really need a ton. You are in a great spot if you're Houston in terms of talent acquisition because you can pretty much go around any street corner and find a 5-star athlete. It's insane the amount of talent in Houston, but I think when you look at this team, it could be 6, 7, even 5 wins, I think, could show that this team is moving in the right direction and that Willie Fritz is kind of opening things up. And then the sky's the limit when you're recruiting out of Houston. I can promise you that. Iowa State is a really fun team. Matt Campbell is ready to repeat what happened in 2021 with Brock Purdy and that really special group and change the result in Arlington, that's for sure. But Rocco Becht is going to be the starter for this team, a huge player that, frankly, I think is going to have a really good year, a very confident, very gritty type player. Absolutely love him. The wide receivers are the separators here. They're the guys that can totally change this season. Jalen Noel, Jaden Higgins are a remarkable duo and going to be a problem for pretty much any defense that they face. And then you have Abu Sama running the ball. They're going to have a ton of fun on the offensive side of the ball, or the Cyclones. But let's get into the state of Kansas, where a ton of really good football is going to be played this year. And we'll start with the Kansas Jayhawks and Jalen Daniels. And we've talked about this 10 times at this point, but Jalen Daniels' health is the thing for this team. There are a million different things that go into winning in a season, but keeping that guy on the field is going to be the number one thing by a mile, because it's been really hard to the last couple of years, and he's someone that when he's on the field, he does really special things about every single day. So I think they're going to want him on the field. Andy Kotelnicki is out, Jeff Grimes is in, but the talent level and the ability is really awesome. So it'll be awesome to watch this team, this offense kind of go to work and see if they can make some noise this year in this conference. Kansas State is one of the betting favorites heading into this year, and Avery Johnson is one of the big-time reasons. He chased out Will Howard to Ohio State, and it was not a mistake. It was not something that they regret at this very moment, because Avery Johnson is special. There's no two ways about that, and I think this run game is going to be really special. Between Avery Johnson, DJ Giddens, and Dylan Edwards, I think they're going to make defenses just really mad. I'm going to be totally honest with you, because when that mesh point comes, the defensive end is going to have no earthly idea where the ball is going, and it's going to be remarkably tough to stop. Then you have an Oklahoma State team that is led by Ollie Gordon. This is the team that has the most experience, has the most comfort behind them, next to Iowa State as well. But Oklahoma State is going to be a really awesome team this year. I think Ollie Gordon is obviously a beast, but Alan Bowman's play is going to be the difference maker. I think there's so many teams that are packed right against each other that there's going to be some of those plays that are bounce of ball plays that are, picks that shouldn't be picks, or fumbles that bounce the wrong way and go to the opposite team that are going to decide these games. And Alan Bowman has been a little bit prone to throwing picks and that type of thing, so it could be a problem for them this upcoming year, but a fantastic team nonetheless. TCU is a really interesting team. They had a really magical 2022, not so magical 2023 with a lot of guys walking out the door. Josh Hoover is back and ready to, play a little bit more consistent, more complete football, and I think they have a number of dudes that are going to be really good. They did a great job of upgrading that offensive line. Cam Cook is someone at running back that I absolutely love and I think is going to be an incredible player this year for them. So there are a number of things on this team that they can definitely make some noise, especially with someone like Sonny Dykes calling plays. They're going to have plenty of offensive production, and there's definitely a chance for TCU to sneak in the back door and make some really incredible plays this year. Texas Tech is another team that I think is going to be really, really fun to watch, particularly because of this wide receiver group. You look at Josh Kelly coming over from Wazoo, Caleb Douglas coming over from Florida, and then a five-star freshman in Micah Hudson. They're going to have plenty of weapons to go to, and I think Barron Morton is going to be able to take enough of a step forward to get the ball there and get it on time, and once you do that, all these guys are going to be able to make plenty of plays. And then on the other side of the ball, you're going to have a more consistent defense this year if you really want to compete with the teams in front of you. So that's going to be the big thing for Texas Tech. I don't necessarily worry too much about the offense scoring. I do worry about the defense being able to hold some teams. UCF is a team that developed entirely throughout the portal. Now, that guy in the picture, RJ Harvey, is an absolute beast and someone that will be a leader of this team, but they brought in KJ Jefferson, Penny Boo, Nigel Kelly on the defensive side is going to be huge, along with Javarius Johnson and a million other guys that have been added into this roster. So this is going to be a very interesting kind of experiment for UCF. I think they do need something of a pop here, nothing crazy by any means, but prove to a lot of recruits around the Orlando area that you're ready to roll, that you can kind of move forward, and then it's going to be maybe really hard to stop you. But I think Nigel Kelly, the defensive player that they brought in on the edge, is likely going to be the most important player for them this year, just because the defense is comfortably the most important part of this team. Utah is a team that is coming in as the on-odds favorite to win this conference and can't find a real reason to argue with them. You have Cam Rising back at quarterback. You have Dorian Singer at wide receiver. Just so many dudes out there. Money Parks is a great player. I think they're going to have plenty of production on the offensive side of the ball as long as Cam Rising is upright. As long as he is on the field and playing football, they're going to definitely be more than fine on the offensive side of the ball. And then Kyle Whittingham and Morgan Scalley's defense will be more than fine. I can almost promise you that. You have Teo Johnson, you have Logan Fanu. I think they have plenty of guys that they're going to play really, really steady football on that side of the ball. And then West Virginia, a really, really fun team that is led by Garrett Green. And I've talked about this kid a number of times, but he's really fun to watch because every time he steps on the football field, there's nowhere else that he'd rather be. He really, really fights every single second of every game, and I think he's an awesome player. Now, they have a really, really tough road. We talked about it yesterday. It is a nightmare of a schedule, so I think they're good enough to beat any team in this conference. Are they able to do it for 9 straight weeks will be kind of the decision maker. And then Jaheim White is a huge player for them, the running back that I think is going to be a fantastic player this upcoming year and maybe, just maybe, open some doors that they haven't had opened in the past. So overall, you look at this conference and you don't see a big drop off. Now, there are a couple of teams at the bottom there that I don't necessarily think have a great shot to win this thing, but overall, you look at all of the different teams in this conference, you look at all of the different things going into this conference, and I can find about 10 teams I could easily make, maybe even 11 teams that I could make the argument to make it to Arlington at the very least. So this is going to be a hard conference to nail down, but I'll do my best to do it right after this. We're going to break down all of my picks for the Big 12 right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just did a little bit of breakdown on every team in the Big 12, and now it's time to make some predictions. And I have gotten some very funny comments, I'll be honest, over the last couple of days. And to be honest, over the last couple of days, I've realized I will never get mad at anyone for picking anything in any conference, because this is really hard to figure out how these conferences are going to go, especially the ACC yesterday. I'm already rethinking about 10 different decisions I made in that one, but at the end of the day, I'm going to roll with my guns, and then at the end of the year, you guys are more than welcome to make fun of me. But let's get into the Big 12 here, and let's break down my predictions. And this is going to be a weird conference. There's going to be a ton of teams at the top that are going to make it really, really tough to figure out who is the best team in this conference at the end of the day. There are so many teams that will have plenty to say, all the way down there to 7. I think are going to be teams that are going to be in it in November, and it's going to be an absolute nightmare, and figuring it out is going to be absolutely crazy. But I do have Iowa State and Kansas State finding their way to Arlington. I think these two teams, kind of for different reasons, are really, really remarkable teams. When I look at Kansas State, I just see an explosivity that I don't see in other teams. I think they are a team that absolutely can do just about everything you want them to do on the football field. Adding someone like Dylan Edwards helps that a ton. There's no two ways about that. I think J.C. Brown on the outside is going to be a really good player. And then that defensive side of the ball is really solid. Braden Mott is someone that I really think is going to be an awesome player this year. Desmond Purnell holding it down the middle of that defense is huge. And then Jacob Parrish, I think, is the guy on the outside that is really going to separate things. Keenan Garber on the other side of things. They have a really good kind of base of players. It's not necessarily anything that is going to smack you over the head other than Avery Johnson and Dylan Edwards. They're going to be a problem, but overall I think they have enough flash, and then they have the foundation to build around that is going to make them really dangerous. And then Iowa State I think is going to have plenty to say this year, but I think it's more because of the experience that they have on their team. I think Rocco Becht coming back as the starter is absolutely huge. You have Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins. I wrote Jaden Noel down here. Jaden Higgins that absolutely are going to be incredible on the outside and be essentially impossible to stop. You know, you can stifle them just a little bit, but I don't think you're going to stop both these guys on an afternoon. Iowa State returns 90% of its production from the offensive side of the ball, second most in the country, and 80% on the defensive side of the ball, fifth most in the country. So this is a team that doesn't really change that much from last year, and that's usually when you see Matt Campbell really make some noise. So I really like both these teams. I expect them to be facing off in Arlington at the end of the year. I have Utah barely missing out because of some tiebreakers and things of that nature. I do think it's going to be a really good team. I do worry a little bit about Cam Rising, but overall, I never really pick with injuries in mind, so I do think these Utah teams are going to have plenty to say. I just think they won't get to Arlington in their very first year. Arizona, Oklahoma State, West Virginia, and Kansas are going to be right there. They are all really, really good teams that are going to have plenty to say in this conference, and I think all of them have different strengths, and they're all going to fight each other in different ways, and it's going to create a little bit of a problem for some of these teams. I'll put it that way, but UCF is a team that I know a lot of people are really, really high on. I like them. I do think they're a really good team and someone that is building something special in Orlando, but overall, don't necessarily think they're going to make the crazy amount of noise that some people think this year. Colorado, TCU, and Texas Tech are right in that same area. I can't necessarily break down, who is the better team among the bunch. I am going to take Colorado to finish above them because they got Shedeur Sanders. I'll be plain and simple. That is the guy that I think is the best quarterback in this conference. And when you have him, you have plenty of things. And frankly, that 6-6 could very easily turn into a 9-3 depending on how that offensive line plays. But that's obviously something we'll break down as the season goes on. Houston and Baylor are kind of in the same boat. I think they're going to make enough noise with the quarterbacks they have there, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be anything overly special. And then BYU, Arizona State, and Cincinnati are just fighting uphill battles this year. I think it's going to be really tough years for all of those programs, and it'll be interesting to see how they kind of develop over the next couple of years in the Big 12, but I do think 2024 is going to be a rather tough year. But let's get into some postseason awards, and I do have Kansas State winning the whole thing. I think this team is just a little bit different than every other team in the conference. I think those three guys in the backfield are just going to be insanely hard to get a beat on. They're going to be able to play multiple running back sets, which is my favorite set in the entirety of college football. When you can have two running backs on the field, I think it makes you so much more multiple, especially when one of those guys is Dylan Edwards. Lost my words there, but when Dylan Edwards is on the field, he adds a dynamic to this offense that hasn't been there in the past, and frankly, they very much need going forward. So I think they're going to absolutely utilize him in a number of different ways, whether it's, having two running backs in the backfield with Avery Johnson in the middle, splitting Dylan Edwards out as a wide receiver while you have DJ Giddens in the backfield, whatever that looks like. Kansas State is going to have so many different ways to attack you that I think they're going to be a team that's just going to be really hard to beat, especially when they're playing elite football and especially when they're running the offense at the clip that I expect them to run it, and with the guy that I expect them to really, really run it very well with, which is Avery Johnson. And then Avery Johnson I do have as the Offensive Player of the Year. I think it's going to be really hard to stop this kid, just plain and simple. I think he can make pretty much every single play you want on the football field. The passing does need to take a step forward in terms of completion percentage and things of that nature, but when you look at the receiving core that he has between J.C. Brown, who is going to be the go-to guy, Dante Cephas coming over from Penn State after a little bit of a down year, but still a very talented kid, and then Keegan Johnson is just a very professional receiver, just always that third down guy that you can go to with very sure hands. You don't necessarily have to worry about him too much. So I do think he'll take enough of a step forward there to make some noise through the air, and then on the ground is where the money is going to be made. On the ground is where everyone's going to be watching very closely. That mesh spot in a read option is going to be a nightmare for every D end or linebacker that is trying to play it, because you don't want either of those guys to have the ball. Regardless of it's DJ Giddens or Dylan Edwards at that mesh point with Avery Johnson, you don't want any of them. You don't want either of those guys with the ball in their hands, and both those guys are super dangerous regardless of where they go. So overall, I think that's going to be where Kansas State just makes it really tough on these defenses. You can play as many good defenses as you want. There's not really a defense that combats what Avery Johnson can do on the ground. So overall, I think that's the biggest difference maker here is Avery Johnson has a number of people around him that are going to take up all the defense's attention, and then he's going to be an absolute problem for them pretty much every which way from Tuesday. And then Jaden Higgins is a wide receiver at Iowa State that I think is going to be an absolute monster this year, someone that I think could be in that kind of fight for Offensive Player of the Year. For Defensive Player of the Year, this is a little bit more of a projection than anything else, but a very talented kid. Logan Fano is someone that I absolutely love. I think he's going to be a problem for pretty much every offensive tackle that you put in front of him. It is a bit of a projection, obviously. He played only 5 games a year ago, but had 3.5 sacks through 5 games, and that's really remarkable, especially for a kid that was as young as he was a year ago. I think he's just going to be an absolute problem. He's someone that is a year older now, more comfortable in this defense, and is going to be a starter for this team, and is just going to be a problem on the outside. I think when you look at Utah's defense, there's going to be plenty of ability on the back end of that defense led by Teo Johnson that you're going to have plenty of time to get to the quarterback as well. You're not necessarily going to have guys that can beat with every single move and beat them right away to get to the quarterback. You're going to have a little bit of time to develop, and frankly, when you have 6'5", 235 leaning on you, it's not going to be easy to hold up. And especially with that guy's speed off the edge, he's going to be an absolute problem. So overall, I think when you look at the best defensive player in this conference, I'd have a tough time saying it's not Travis Hunter. But at the end of the day, I don't think they're going to win enough games to be in this conversation. And then Colin Oliver is another one, a linebacker at Oklahoma State that I think is going to have plenty to say about this defensive season in the Big 12. Freshman of the year, I have yet another wide receiver. I've gone through 4 conferences. I picked 4 wide receivers as my freshman of the year, and frankly, it just goes to show you how special this group is. I think Micah Hudson is someone that is going to put together a really good season for Texas Tech, and it was a reason that they brought in, there was only 2 5-stars that were brought into the Big 12 this past year, and it was him and Jordan Seaton over at Colorado. So this kid's going to be special. There's no two ways about that. I could put Jordan Seaton here, but when we talk about these awards, they like to look at stats. They like to look at, receptions, receiving yards, that type of thing. And frankly, I think Micah Hudson might just be leading Texas Tech in receiving yards at the end of the year. So I think he's going to be an absolute monster. Jerlon Miller is another guy, wide receiver at Colorado, that I think is going to have plenty to say here, and definitely a really, really talented player for them. And then the transfer of the year, I think it's going to be Dylan Edwards. This one, honestly, was not too tough for me. The second that he transferred, I knew this team was just a little bit different. I knew it opened so many doors in the run game, in the pass game. It made the job so much easier for Avery Johnson, which is huge in the pass game. So overall, I think you look at this team and you add someone like Dylan Edwards to a group that is already ridiculously athletic and really hard to get on the ground. It's going to be impossible to get a beat on what this offense is going to do this year, and I think Dylan Edwards is going to be at the center of a lot of it, whether you want to put him on the outside and motion him in, or play him at running back and motion him out, or you can play around with a million different formations with this kid because he's one of those athletes that is just downright special. And then Dorian Singer, a wide receiver from Utah, I think is going to be huge for them this upcoming year and definitely have plenty to say about what they do this upcoming year. But overall, I do think Kansas State is going to be that team that separates. I think they're going to be that team that just makes life incredibly hard for every defense that they play, and I think they have enough guys on the back end of that of their defense with Jacob Parrish and Keenan Garber that I think they're going to make enough plays. They don't necessarily have to be spectacular on defense. I think they're going to be more than fine, but I think they just have to get the ball where it belongs, which is in the offense's hand, let them work and let them do what is going to make them special, which is run the ball. So I do think Kansas State's going to be one of those teams that maybe it's, pretty monotonous wins at times. Maybe it's running the ball, maybe it's playing solid defense, but at the end of the day, when you have someone like Avery Johnson in the backfield, they're going to make those plays that are going to make your jaw drop. And they're going to make plays that are going to make defense's jaw drop, and then it's going to be really, really hard to deal with them. So overall, when I look at this conference, there are a ton of teams that have a ton going for them. There are so many different teams that have a ton of experience, have a ton of players coming back from, injuries like Cam Rising. There are so many different teams that are going to have, a shot to win this thing. But when I look at the team that has the biggest difference maker on their team, the guy that I think is going to make the most noise this year in this conference, I pick Avery Johnson at 10 times out of 10. So I do think Avery Johnson and the Kansas State Wildcats lift the trophy at the end of the year in Arlington, and it'll be really fun to watch that when it does happen. But I do think they're going to have to go through Iowa State to do it. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to break down some of the programs that are just starting to click. Everything's starting to go their way, and they're really, really dangerous programs when that happens. So we'll break down those 5 programs I have for you right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just gave my predictions for the Big 12 this upcoming year. I do have the Kansas State Wildcats winning that thing, and it's going to be a crazy conference that is going to have a ton of twists and turns, but I do think Avery Johnson and the Wildcats come out on top. But let's get into some programs that are just really starting to click, and it is a dangerous reality for pretty much everyone around them. And there are a couple of teams I want to break down here. I got 5 here, but frankly, I could go deeper than this if I need to, and might just in a segment coming up over the next couple of days. But let's get into this, and let's talk about Tennessee first, because Tennessee is a little bit different of an example where they really haven't been that far off. You look at this Tennessee team, obviously it has not been the result that they've wanted for the last about 20 years, but the reality is when you look at this program, there are so many things there. There are so many things in Knoxville that can be utilized that just haven't been in the past couple of years, and since Josh Heupel has shown up in Knoxville, it's been different. That's just the reality. He showed up in 2022, they made noise immediately. Hendon Hooker was a Heisman candidate and maybe the Heisman favorite when he went down. Tennessee was a team that was heading possibly to a playoff at that very moment. So there were a lot of things that were happening that 2022 season that kind of just laid the groundwork, is the best way to put it. It's something that kind of opened a lot of doors for them and got a lot of people around that program to believe in the head guy. And that's the number one thing when you're talking about college football today, is you have a ton of stuff to figure out, and you have a ton of different people that are going to help you figure that out. If those people aren't buying into your program, you have a problem. Whether it's the boosters or the administration, and we've talked about alignment a lot, that is a huge thing in college sports right now, because there is a lot of red tape that you have to get through now that you didn't have to get through 5-10 years ago. So I do think Josh Heupel opened a lot of doors with that 2022 season, but this would be the year where they really open things up. I think this would be the year where they prove everyone that they're not just a team that popped up in 2022 and then kind of shrunk back into the darkness. They're not a team that is going to be a pop team. They're going to be here to stay, and this is a really good opportunity to figure that out. This is a really good opportunity to kind of prove that to everyone, and Nico Iamaleava is absolutely a guy that can make that happen. The defensive side of the ball is the other side that I think has been remarkably good. Tim Banks over there as defensive coordinator has done a great job with this defense, and on the recruiting trail, they continue to get better. They continue to find guys on the recruiting trail that, frankly, they just wouldn't have got a couple of years ago. They wouldn't have got 5 years ago battling Alabama and Georgia and all of the different SEC teams. Now they're getting those guys, and they're bringing them in at a pretty impressive clip. So I think it's one of those teams that maybe you don't look at right now as a huge team because, frankly, for the last 20 years, they haven't been. But I do think they are a program that can be great. There's no two questions about that. You look at so many different things that can happen with this program and so many different buttons that can be pressed that haven't been in the past. There are so many things that they can do, and I think they could be an SEC team that you will look at pretty much every year in Atlanta, or you look in the college football playoff and they're there every single year. This is a very dangerous program, and frankly, they're starting to hit the buttons that no one before Josh Heupel has pressed. So it's going to be huge to watch the next couple of years, and frankly, this year is a huge opportunity for the Volunteers to kind of just prove that they're here to stay, prove that they aren't a pop team in 2022, prove that they are a team everyone's going to have to worry about for the next 10, 20, however long you want to put a moniker on that. But let's move forward to another SEC program. The Auburn Tigers is a little bit of a weird one as well, because when you look at this program overall, they've had pop years. There's no two ways about that. 2010, obviously winning a national title. 2013, a really remarkable team with Nick Marshall. 2019, before that LSU game, was a really, really fun year for them as well. So they have plenty of years where you see the potential in this program, but stringing them together has been really hard. And the reason for that is very, very obvious. Nick Saban was over there in Tuscaloosa and made everything just really hard for this team, but he's gone now, and the door is open for the first time pretty much since 2009, so you have the ability to make some noise here. You don't necessarily need that Luck or Cam Newton that you had in the past. You have plenty of ability to get your footing and play on the same footing as Alabama for the first time in quite some time. So I think Auburn's definitely taking advantage of that. I mean, they're dominating the state of Alabama for the first time in a really long time, and that's a huge deal for a team like Auburn to be able to do that. That's why I'm worried about a team like Penn State not doing that up in Pennsylvania right now. So there are a number of things going right for this program. You bring in a guy like Cam Coleman, Perry Thompson in the wide receiver positions, someone like Walker White at the quarterback position I think is going to be huge for this program, and I think when you look at all of this different stuff going in Auburn's direction, there's an opening here where whether it's Hugh Freeze that kind of walks through it or the next head coach, I don't know, but I do think there is an opening for Auburn to be a really dangerous team and to be a team that they're going to have a real problem dealing with in the future. So I think when you look at all of the different things going into this year and beyond in Auburn football, Hugh Freeze is hitting all the right buttons. He's doing all the right things, and he's using this opening that they have at Alabama to his advantage. So it'll be awesome to watch that team develop, but overall, I think a lot of things are going right, and frankly, it's going to be really hard to stop this team if they really get rolling. Another team I want to talk about here for a second is the SMU Ponies. I think this is a team that I've talked about already a little bit, but the NIL world leans into SMU. That's just the reality. The NIL world is definitely something that SMU has been waiting for quite some time, and they're finally back at the big boy table. They finally got into a Power 4 conference, which is the big time thing for this program. That's what they've always needed, and they finally have a seat at the table. They finally got into the ACC, and it's going to be dangerous for about just everyone in the conference and everyone in the country, frankly, because they are in the middle of one of the most talent-rich areas in the entire country in Dallas, a smaller college, so that might be a little bit held against them when you're talking about recruiting, but overall, this is a program that's not going to have too much trouble finding the talent. Now, getting that in-house is going to be a little bit of a fight. You know, you have to battle with Texas and Texas A&M and all of the different teams in your conference, but overall, when you look at what they can do just staying in that city, it's going to be special. There's no two ways about that. I think this year is going to be huge for this team because you have a chance to just prove that you belong. I think a lot of people walking into this year in the ACC are looking at the three teams walking in and aren't necessarily thinking about them too much. But SMU can absolutely make some noise this year. Frankly, I'm going 10-2. So obviously, I think that they're going to do that. And if they can do that, the pocketbooks are going to open even more. And that is a scary reality for just about everyone in college football because the pocketbooks are very deep in Dallas and at SMU. So I think this is going to be a very fun team to watch and overall a team that definitely is going to have plenty to say in the ACC this year and beyond. But let's get into UCF, and this is a very, very interesting team, kind of like SMU, where you're just smack dab in the middle of a really, really good spot. You're in Orlando, and there is not a ton of cities across the country that have as much talent as Orlando does. Maybe Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, you could argue, but overall, there's plenty there, and there's plenty that they can tap into and do really, really remarkable things. Obviously, in 2017 was the remarkable year for this program, went undefeated with Scott Frost and Mackenzie Milton and declared themselves national champions, and people kind of laughed that off. They didn't necessarily take them very seriously, but Gus Malzahn has this program back at the Big 12. They have them back at the big boy table, or at the big boy table for the first time, and they're definitely doing plenty of stuff to make this thing happen very quickly. Obviously, bringing in a guy like KJ Jefferson to lead your offense is huge. I've called him the great value Cam Newton. It's not an insult to him, it's just how good Cam Newton was. But the reality is this is a really, really fun program and one that absolutely is going to make noise in recruiting, and particularly in the transfer portal. It seems Gus Malzahn is going to attack that pretty aggressively. So this is a dangerous program, and frankly has been for a very long time, but just hasn't quite done the things that you need to do down there to make all the right decisions. And when you're in the AAC, there's only so much you can do. Now you're in the Big 12, and you can definitely make some more noise, and Gus Malzahn is doing exactly that. So very much like UCF, although I don't think 2024 is going to be super advantageous for them. I think beyond, they're going to make plenty of noise. But now let's get into Rutgers, and frankly, it's just Greg Schiano. He showed up there, and he instilled a culture, instilled a drive in this team that wasn't there before. Because frankly, I would turn on my TV, and if it was a Big Ten game with Rutgers in it, I assumed they were going to lose and turned it off. At least for the majority of my childhood, that's the way that it worked at Rutgers, and that's not the way it works anymore. Greg Schiano does not have his guys showing up to any game across the entire season where they don't think they can win. Because of the confidence that he instills in this team, it opens so many doors for this program, and there is going to be a big thing here in talent acquisition. You're not exactly in the greatest place in Piscataway, New Jersey, to get a bunch of 18 to 22-year-olds to join your program. That being said, winning cures all. Winning is the thing that opens so many doors, and there are a number of different areas that they can go into, whether it's Pennsylvania or Maryland or Virginia or New York. There are plenty of different, states that they can just dip their toe into, grab a couple of guys, and keep moving on. They're 20th in the recruiting class rankings right now, which would be their highest finish in 2012 and their highest finish ever in the 247 rankings. So this is a remarkable program, one that is moving in the very much the right direction, and one that can really capitalize off this year. With the realignment and all the teams coming in and the doing away with divisions, all of that different stuff, they have openings where they don't have to play Ohio State, or they don't have to play Michigan, or they don't have to play Penn State, and they're going to be able to get a couple more wins where it used to be they would get blown out on a Saturday. So overall, this is a team that I think is going to make some noise. I think is going to be kind of a problem for the next couple of years, and maybe won't win this conference or do anything crazy, but is going to be one of those teams that you turn on the TV on a Saturday and they're giving Ohio State a fight, or they're giving Michigan a fight, or Penn State, or Oregon, or one of these really good teams in this conference, and at some point, they might just pop and make it into the playoffs. So I very much like this team, and I think they're going to be a very dangerous team this upcoming year. But overall, those programs are absolutely just the tip of the iceberg. There are a number of other programs that are really starting to click right now, and definitely could have really good futures in the future, but let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we're going to break down my Hot Take Thursday. I have a take about rotations that I think is going to decide the national title, and we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just got into a little bit of update on some of the programs that are really starting to click and might just be problems going forward for some of the teams in their conference and in the college football world. But let's get into a Hot Take Thursday, and I think rotations are going to win someone a national title this year. And we've talked about this a lot on the show, and it's the worst kept secret in college football right now, but depth matters today more than ever has in the sport. You have to win at least 16 games to get yourself a national title now, and that is a really, really tough feat. Obviously, 15 games was plenty hard, but adding another one to that, maybe even 17 depending on where you fall, it's not going to be easy. I can promise you that. So I think when you look at a number of different things, when you look at particularly the NFL, they're going to play 17, and you got to play 20, 21, I think, actually, to win a Super Bowl now, and the team that handles the injuries and the bumps and bruises tends to be the one that lifts the Lombardi at the end of the day, or the one that has Patrick Mahomes, but that's a totally side point that we can get into later. But the college football world is starting to look more like the NFL. That's just the reality. Behind the scenes, it looks much more like the NFL than it ever has, and that makes the formula on the field just a little bit more like the NFL. You're going to have to battle with depth and rotations a little bit more, and those teams that deal with some of those injuries that are inevitably going to come are definitely going to be the ones that are going to lift that trophy at the end of the year and be the ones that win the first 12-team playoff. So I'm going to use the big four, the Texas, Georgia, Oregon, and Ohio State, to kind of illustrate this, break down a couple of different position rooms in those teams that are definitely going to play a huge part in this year. And let's start with the Texas wide receivers. I think when you talk about this group, I think it was Kyle Flood that was talking at some summit a couple of days ago and maybe this past weekend, where he said they have 9 guys going into fall at that position that they feel like can play this upcoming year. And that is a really, really cool thing, but also create some questions about how you're going to rotate those guys in, who's going to start, how it's going to work out, especially with the transfer portal right over your shoulder, how all of this is going to work out for Steve Sarkisian. And I think you brought in Isaiah Bond, you brought in Silas Bolden, you brought in Matthew Golden, and you have plenty to choose from. There's no two ways about that. I think when you look at the top line guys, I think Jonte Cook could make that jump. DeAndre Moore is someone that it seems like could be starting in that slot position, but you're going to have to rotate guys, and it's going to be a little bit of a new thing for Steve Sarkisian, because when you look at his past teams, especially even last year, when they were on the field, or when the offense was on the field, it was Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, Jordan Whittington. For pretty much every single snap, those were your 3 wide receivers. And then if they took it down to 2, it was Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell, or a mix of those 3. So it's not like he's rotated a ton of guys throughout his career. You look back even at the 2020 Bama team, there wasn't a lot of rotation at that wide receiver position. It was a lot of John Mechie. It was a lot of Devontae Smith. It was a lot of Jalen Waddle before he went down. There was a lot going into those 3 guys, and not necessarily a ton to be spread around. Now you add tight ends into that and all of that different type of thing, and it adds a little bit of ers and ahs. But overall, Sark has his guys, and he rolls with those guys. So now he has a little bit of a battle on his hands. Who do you put in, who do you start, and how do you rotate these guys in is going to be a huge question. They only had 8 catches returning in this room from a year ago, and they're all from that guy right there. Jonte Cook is someone that I think is going to have plenty to say in this offense. Frankly, I think he's going to be one of the starters along with Isaiah Bond and DeAndre Moore, but you add DeAndre Moore into that mix, Ryan Wingo, Ryan Niblett is also a player that's going to make some noise. They have so many different ways that they can go about this thing. You can rotate guys in pretty frequently and do it in the middle of drives and definitely play around with some different things. You can play around with personnel depending on your field position. And maybe you have red zone guys and you have open field guys and you have, backed up into your goal line guys. It'll be interesting to see how all this unfolds, but obviously it's a good problem to have. When you feel like you have 9 wide receivers that can play the sport at a really high level this year, you feel pretty good about your chances, but it does open the door where a lot of things could go wrong. You could rotate in the wrong guy at the wrong time, or you could not rotate enough, and then guys get frustrated and the locker room hurts a little bit. So it's going to be tough to kind of figure this out for Steve Sarkisian, especially because he doesn't necessarily rotate guys too much, at least in the past when it comes to the wide receiver position. So it's going to be kind of an interesting experiment out there in Austin, and frankly, it's going to be one of those that likely will decide their season in a lot of ways. But let's move on to the Oregon defensive line, and they have 2 dudes on the interior of this defensive line. When you talk about Jamari Caldwell and Derek Harmon, they're absolute monsters. Kenyon Hudson-Ware is also a really fantastic player, but they're probably going to need more than that. When you talk about this conference and the physicality that you're going to have to play in the Big Ten, you're going to have to be ready to go every single week, and you can't just have 2 guys that are ready to go. I think when you talk about the really dominant defensive lines across the country over the last couple of years, it's not just 2 guys. Obviously, the Texas team last year had Devondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. They were incredible players, but they're not nearly the players that they were a year ago if you don't have guys like Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton coming in when they need to kind of give these guys breathers. So it doesn't necessarily need to be anything aggressive, but you're going to need guys like Amari Washington, like Terrence Green, like Michael Gardner, Aiden Breland to make some plays on this defensive line if you're going to be able to keep up with the Michigans of the world, with the Ohio States of the world from the physicality standpoint. So I think Oregon did a number of really good things this year in the portal, and I think the biggest one was bringing in someone like Jamari Caldwell on the interior of that defensive line, but you're going to need to step up against some really good offensive lines this year, and you're going to have to really impose your will in some respects on that defensive line, and I think they have the players to do it, but you're going to have to rotate some guys in, and you're probably going to have 4 or 5 guys at that position alone that are able to play pretty much at the drop of a hat. So, excuse me. So it's going to be kind of a battle. Excuse me, I apologize. It's definitely going to be kind of a battle. If they can figure that out, they definitely have a real shot to win a national title. They already have a real shot, but they definitely would be a shoe-in to win a national title because it's a really good group that they have, but rotating those guys in is not necessarily going to be the easiest thing in the world and could hypothetically cause some problems for them on the physicality side of things. Let's talk about, now let's talk about the UGA DBs, because I think this is a group that a lot of UGA fans feel pretty good about, but definitely have a little bit of worries. When you talk about that UGA defense, this is one of the worries along with defensive tackle. I think they'll tend to be fine at both positions, but overall, there are some big-time things that are going to have to happen on that back end, and I think you start with Malachi Starks. The front line is really solid in my eyes. Malachi Starks is one of the best DBs in the entire country, maybe the best, depending on who you talk to. John Aguero is a really good player. He has not played a ton of snaps, so there are still some questions there, but I think he'll be more than fine. Dan Jackson is another really talented, really veteran player that is just going to be where he needs to be. He's not necessarily going to do anything, athletically incredible, but he's absolutely going to make a number of plays and hit some guys really hard in the process. And then you have Dalen Everett and Julian Humphrey on the outside at the corner positions. All those guys I think are going to be really solid this year, but you're going to need guys to rotate in, and you're going to need guys to give these guys breaks throughout the game, because there's going to be some real passing attacks that walk into Athens, or they have to walk into their stadium, and it's going to be tough to deal with. But you talk about guys like Jake Pope, who came over from Bama. Ja'Cory Thomas in that picture right there has to be ready to roll right behind Johnny Laguero. Daniel Harris is another cornerback that I think is going to be absolutely huge for this team. But I think when you really talk about the two players that are likely going to be not the most important, but definitely players that are going to have plenty to say about the way that this back end works this upcoming year, you look at the two freshmen. KJ Bolden and Ellis Robinson are absolutely huge for this team, and I think when you look at them, they're going to play big snaps. There's no two ways about that. In fact, Kirby Smart said KJ Bolden is further along than Malachi Starks was his freshman year at this time, and he played a ton his freshman year and made some really remarkable plays. So they feel really good about him right now. Ellis Robinson's going to have to make some plays right behind, Daniel Harris and Dalen Everett and Julian Humphrey. He's that guy on the outside, and he's going to have to make some plays this upcoming year, and rotating these guys in and out is not going to be an easy thing. Now, having Malachi Starks in the middle of that field that essentially will never have to come out makes you feel a lot better about things, but overall, rotating those corners and those DBs in and out is going to be an interesting battle for Tarvarius Robinson and the entire UGA staff. But finally, let's get into the Ohio State O-line, and this one's a little bit different because, frankly, if you were to ask any team, if they were to have it their way, they play the same 5 guys every single week and they wouldn't miss a snap. But that rarely happens. Frankly, I don't know if that's ever happened, if I'm being totally honest. So they're going to have some trouble. They're going to have something happen, whether it's an injury or just a guy not playing as well as they need to, or just needing some depth at times, needing to get guys, a little bit of rest on a drive here and there. So you got to play 17 or 16 games. These are some of the sacrifices you're going to have to make. So I do think they have really good player. Josh Simmons, I think, is going to take a step forward at that right tackle position this upcoming year, and I think they're going to be able to protect Will Howard and be able to run block pretty well, but at the end of the day, they have to do it at an elite level. They're going to face defensive tackles like Kenneth Grant, like Mason Graham, like Jamari Caldwell, like we just talked about, and they're going to have to move them off the ball, plain and simple. And if they can do that, if they can dominate even the great defensive lines in this conference, then they're going to be nearly impossible to beat. But you're going to need more than the first 5 guys to do that. And you talk about guys like Luke Montgomery is going to be absolutely huge for this team. George Fitzpatrick, Zen Michaelski, Austin Sireveld, that's quite the last name. But overall, all those guys are going to have to go. They're going to have to be ready to roll pretty much at the drop of a hat, whether it's 8 guys or 7 guys or 9 guys that you're rotating in there. You're going to need a ton on the offensive line because there's likely going to be an injury at some point. How severe, I don't know. How intense, I don't know. But at the end of the day, you're going to need someone to step in when they maybe didn't expect to. And that's going to be a really tough thing to figure out for that offensive line. And it's definitely going to be one of those things that's going to be really awesome to watch. So overall, I think you look at the rotations and you look at all of the different depth issues that some of the big-time teams in this country have. I think you look at these 4 teams and you feel pretty confident about what their depth is, but the rotation of those players into the lineup is going to be a huge thing for those teams. Whether you're talking about the Texas wide receivers and making sure that them and Quinn Ewers are on the exact same schedule, or the Oregon defensive line and making sure that they can keep up with the physicality of the conference that they're walking into, you're going to have a ton of different things on your plate, and frankly, whoever rotates them the best, whoever fits them into the best spots, and whoever has the most dudes to rotate in there is likely the team that's going to be raising the trophy in January. So I think that's going to be the big thing this year, but that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Thank you so much for listening. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's